Okay, we're recording. Okay, so we're right now as a class we're reading a book, and so a little bit about the book is that Sophia is currently telling a story that isn't hers, and she's trying to find out the truth about how/why Jawad was killed. They're both like teenagers in high school. Jawad is in 9th grade, and he was interested in reusing materials to make things. One day he used materials to make something, and he got accused of being a terrorist and having a bomb. After being held in custody, going back to normal everyday life wasn't easy, and things went downhill fast, such as Jawad being murdered. Although we still don't know why, Sophia is a girl that found Jawad's dead body. Sophia has visions and can talk to him even though he is dead. Although Sophia found Jawad's dead body, she still went back to school and acted like everything was normal. So based off of that, we did some research on what you guys do for a living and stuff, and we came up with some questions. So Kaylee, you can go first.
Are we doing our book-based questions? Okay, so for my book-based question, I said, Jawad talks about how he felt dead but wasn't dead yet in the book. I want to know why he got to such a low point in life to feel like that. How would you handle this situation if a student came to you and said they felt low in life?
So that's not an uncommon type of situation that kids come and talk to either a psychologist or a social worker in a school, is that they are feeling very low about things. And so the first thing that you need to do whenever you're starting a relationship with that, of talking about someone's situation of how they got there, is build rapport and assess the situation. And so you would, in building rapport, you ask questions about their life, and so they start to feel comfortable talking with you because you're talking about some pretty serious things. You would also go over confidentiality, and that is anything you say to me is said in confidence. I cannot repeat that to anybody else unless you are saying you're going to hurt yourself, you're saying you're thinking about hurting somebody, or somebody is hurting you. So those are the rules of confidentiality between a therapist and a client, which is what it would be when a student comes to you. So in that situation, number one, you would build rapport in talking with them. Number two, you would also assess the situation for the seriousness of it. If you felt that there was a situation that they were so low in life that they were contemplating committing suicide, you would then take it's almost like if you think of a flow chart, if you felt that they were thinking or contemplating suicide, you would move directly to a crisis situation within that, engage of whether they need, what level of care or what level of support they need. Sometimes if it is to the extreme level that they are saying, I am so low, I don't want to live anymore, you would straight out ask them, are you thinking about committing suicide? And if the answer is yes, then you would look at a hospitalization. Now let's just say that this student is saying, I just feel hopeless, I feel very down. You would assess their level of depression, and then after you assess that, there are different things that you could do. You would assess, do you need to refer them out? Do you need to refer them for medical intervention, where they might need medicine? And so you would probably be getting the parents involved in that, about that conversation and letting them know. That could be working with the student of how they can talk to their parents, if they want to be the ones to tell their parents alone, or if they need support and how they have that conversation with their parent, depending on the situation. If it's more of a lower level and the student is just feeling down, you would talk about some strategies and coping skills that they can use, and you would start teaching those. Sometimes it's about retraining your brain, changing your self-talk, maybe gratitude, a support system. You would evaluate where the student is with that, with having a support system, and help them develop what skills they need to start feeling better, and relieve some of those depressed feelings.
Okay.
Is there anything you want to add to that, Helena?
I would also say some situations you can't talk about a lot of stuff that happens in school. You want to kind of refer them out because you don't want to bring up something that's going on at home and then send them back to math class either. So work on different coping skills to get them through the day. And then if you need to bring the parents involved, we can like, hey, this is what came up. If the child is okay with us reaching out to your parents, like maybe we can see some outside counseling and go further with this. Or
That's a very good point she brought up. Basically, I'm going to use this as an example. Let's say that out of that, the student said, well, there are some things I've never talked about before, and you find out that they are being sexually abused by a family member. Okay, well, number one, that means somebody is hurting them, so that would be a DCFS call that you would have to break confidentiality, okay? Number two, you would help that student in, Helena is right, that would be out of something that you would talk about to deal with at school, because like she said, it's can you imagine like talking about something that deep and then going back to math and taking a test, right?
Yeah, that would be hard. If a student like came to you and they didn't want like their family to know anything about it, can you guys continue to meet with them and not let their parents know, or do you have to let parents know that you're meeting with them?
Right. So in school, there are so many times you can see a
at least
student.
8. We try to keep at least 4 before we reach out to parents to get consent at least. So we can meet us 4 times, then we're going to send a consent form home for like the 5th time. And if we don't get a form back, then we're not going to say, don't come talk to us, but we're going to say, you know, you're reaching that level of time, how many times you can talk to you.
You might even help educate the parents about what those services look like to make them feel more comfortable. But if you're right, I mean, if it reaches a certain point then, and we don't have parent consent, then
You have to.
yeah, honor that.
Okay. From what we know, Sophia was like not close to Jawad at all, and they were not friends before Jawad was killed. Sophia is telling Jawad's story, but Jawad's dead. If a student came to you and they said they were talking to a dead person, what would you do?
So what I had written down about that is, again, you would start with going through the confidentiality discussion, and then second, you would assess the situation. So I would want more details about what that means, because there are some psychiatric conditions where you hallucinate, or you have delusions, or you have hallucinations. It also can be drug related. There are people who use drugs that can have hallucinations or delusions. And so I would, you would ask questions. You would probably talk to some teachers and see what their behavior looks like in the school setting to assess that situation, and then determine if it is something that is more serious and significant that they would need to be referred for outside counseling. In this situation, that what actually was happening in the book, that probably is something I would still refer out for, because that would be outside of my area of expertise.
When you like went to go talk to like a teacher or something, would you just like ask the teacher how they're acting because confidentiality? Would you just like try to give as little information as you could, or like how would you ask a teacher?
Right. So you can say up to a certain point. You cannot give out details of confidential information, but you can say, for example, like, how is Joe Smith functioning in your classroom? So that's an open-ended question. Do you have any concerns? How do they interact with peers? So those are all questions that aren't giving out any information that would break confidentiality.
Okay.
So Sophia found Jawad's body and was like super traumatized by it. So how would you help a student that came to you about a traumatic event?
So what I had written down about trauma in general is, again, in starting out, you would ask questions to get more details. Trauma it is very broad of what can include trauma, and something that could happen to me could be very traumatic. It could happen to Helena, and she wouldn't consider that traumatic at all. So a lot of how you define a traumatic event is not the event in itself, but how you feel and how that event made you feel. So for example, if you went through a fire, and how you experienced that and how that made you feel compared to somebody else might be different. So you would assess that situation and get more details about what that traumatic event was. And then your next step from that, so you would get more details, find out about the trauma, and then you would figure out and assess, what does this person need? What do we need to do to support them? What resources do they need? It could be, for example, if it was a fire, I'm just using that as an example, They might need resources such as like blankets, clothes, housing, all of that. So part of what a social worker does in the school is that they would help hook that family up with other resources that can help them in that area. It could be that they need counseling services, and so that could be either appropriate in school or not appropriate in school. It could be that they need some psychoeducation just to understand what they're going through, what their neurological system is going through by experiencing that trauma. And then it could also be hooking them up with a support group. It could be trying to help them figure out who their support people are in their life. And then if they needed, you would assess that to see if counseling in school would be appropriate. But a lot of it would be assessing the situation and then figuring out what the needs are and then addressing those needs appropriately.
Sophia called the teacher who reported Jawad for the cosplay jetpack, but the teacher ended up playing the victim and saying that she was not in the wrong, but Sophia was, for having questions about the case. What would you do if a student came to you about a teacher they feel is racist or unfair to them?
I felt like this was one of the harder questions. Because then you're talking about a coworker, right? Like this is somebody you're working with. So one of the things I would do again is I would get the details of the situation, and I would make sure that the student understands how I can help them and what my role is and what is above me and who the right person to report that to. So obviously a school psychologist, a school social worker can't be the person who would make a decision that has to do with that employee or the teacher. But what we could do is we could help with the communication of that, asking like, what are the things that happen? Do other students feel this way? Have you talked with the teacher and let them know how that made you feel? And then help them also talk about how they can help them with communication, kind of coach them through that communication of how they could go to, probably the principal is who they would report that to, and help them with the communication of how to do that. Maybe even talk about if there are other people who felt that way. I think there's power in numbers, if there's more than one person describing an event or maybe other situations. There can be situations, that level of racism, it could be something that teacher could be at a very mild end where they were very unaware that maybe it was a microaggression, something that they just needed some education on, where if you talk to them of how it made them feel, they would apologize and it could be taken care of there. Or it could be to another extreme level that teacher is very racist and it is a very extreme situation of something that maybe that teacher needs discipline. But I would help coach or help support that student through that process. Is there anything else you can think of?
What would the student want in the situation?
Yeah.
Like, do you want to go talk to the teacher about it? Do you want to go take different action about it? Like, what do you want to go from there? Coach them through whatever situation that they want to do.
Yeah.
Because give them some kind of power in the situation. Because you already feel low and little about your teacher is saying these things to you. You already lost a friend. It's like, how do you want this to play out? Like, what do you want to see happen?
But I think that's a really hard situation because I would also support the student in being like validating their feelings. How does this make you feel? How are you feeling about this? And helping support them because that person, a teacher, is a person of authority and over you. That's a very difficult thing to go to for some people, to go to your principal and report them.
I also let them know how proud I am of them for even speaking up to say something, because it takes a lot to say, hey, this person is being rude and racist to me. I don't know how I feel about this. I don't feel good. What would I do about it? So that's takes courage.
And at the end of the day, I would say, let's say it was at the mild end of more of a mild microaggression. At the end of the day, that student did not feel comfortable about what that teacher said. And especially in the situation of what happened in the book, that's not right what happened. And so somehow there does need to be communication with that teacher of, you made a student feel this way, like they need to be aware. It may need it may be that they need to be educated on how they made that student feel.
So Sophia might have had some sort of like connection to him after seeing his body dumped in the park. How would you deal with a student saying that they have like visions of people or like people that have passed?
I feel like this is very similar to the other one
Mhm.
about, talking to a dead person. I would handle it in the same way of like getting more information, assessing the level, seeing if you feel like it is somehow related to a much more serious psychiatric issue where of hallucinations or delusions, or could it be drug related, or finding out more information about that. Obviously it's a very unusual situation.
Okay, that was like all the questions that we had based off of the book that we read. But now after we did some research, we came up with some more curiosity based questions. So now we're gonna ask you those. Okay.
My curiosity question was, when students tell you something very serious about hurting themselves or others, what do you do first?
Okay, so if a student comes to you and they have said that they are hurting themselves, or if you even think that they are hurting themselves, there are actually protocol threat assessments of questions, and in the school we would record those answers, and depending on how they answer those questions would make a difference on what you do next. I think I referred to this in an earlier question. It could be that would be calling in a crisis team. And so if once you do your threat assessment, if there is enough evidence there that it is a serious threat, then you would call in. There's professionals in our community who their job is specifically to evaluate what level of support that person needs, and it could be hospitalization. And that does happen in the school setting where the crisis team is called. I mean, that's not an uncommon thing that can happen. When the crisis team is called, we as the support people, if we are with them, we usually stay with the student. We call the parents and we let them know what's happening. Sometimes the parents might take them straight to the emergency room. The crisis team is still called, or they may wait and let the crisis team come out to the school.
If a student...
Wait, hold on. Is there any other details you can think of with that I left out?
About them coming back to school really serious enough,
What would you do if like a student didn't want like their parents to know at all, but they're hurting themselves? Like if they were hurting themselves, but they didn't want their parents to know because they were scared of how their parents would react or what they would do. What would you do in that situation?
That's a hard situation to deal with, and so you have to balance out in listening with it, that like there is confidentiality, but like again, that is a time that you can break confidentiality, and you would have to work with the student. That might be coaching and talking with the student about how can we talk to your parents? Do you want me there? A lot of times if there are situations, like let's just say for example, I mean, one of the main concerns would be if there is suspected abuse going on in that home, and like let's say the student said, you don't understand, like if I tell my mom that I'm cutting myself, she'll beat me, or she'll lock me in my room and not give me dinner. Well, that right there is a DCFS call, because that child is being abused or neglected, and you would need to work through that. But you would need to tell the student, like, I have to do this. I'm a mandated reporter, so it'd be assessing why they're worried about telling their parent and the level of threat, because it can be very real. That can be a true situation that child really might be threatened if they tell their parent, or it could be that they're scared to do it, that's a really scary thing to tell them. So you would work with what level of what you have to do in that situation, of all to the extreme of that would need to be a DCFS call, all the way to maybe what is a way you can communicate with your parent about this. And it could be even offering, engaging what they want. It could be where you are on the phone with the student. It could be that you call the parent in and have a meeting. So that could vary depending on what the true threat from the parent is and what the student wants. But mainly, you are going to work with the student that may not be a choice, that, you know, that depending on the severity that you need to tell the parent.
I'll reread the question. So they're having thoughts of killing someone. I would also see they have a plan of action. They took any steps to do so. And if they haven't done those type of things, we can coach them through, like, how can we, you know, maybe these thoughts of what's going on. Can we talk to your parents? So coach them in that way. So, and still going to that point. So if it gets there, we may have to tell someone and include someone in this conversation. But right now, we're just having these thoughts. How can we limit these thoughts that you're having right now and get you different kind of help that you might need?
Yeah, so if it is just that they're having thoughts of hurting themselves, one of the things, and you hit on this a little bit, but would be helping that student come up with coping strategies, listing out those coping strategies when you are feeling like this. How can you change your thoughts? What are things that make you feel good? Like if you're home, listening to music, taking a walk. Who are people you can call if you're feeling like this? Who's somebody you can talk to, and helping them identify ways to stop those thoughts.
Okay. I feel like you've already answered my other question, so Bailey, you can go.
How would you help a student that was getting cyberbullied?
I have a friend that's going through this situation right now with her high school daughter, and it is a tough one. So, number one, again, what you would do is you would listen to the student, get details, and assess the situation. You're going to respond differently based on the level of severity. Like if it is true and there's documentation, sometimes that can mean getting the principal involved. It's going to mean most likely if there is any kind of truth and validation to it, because the principal is going to have to assess the situation and interview and do an evaluation of it. It could mean getting the police involved if there is harassment. It's going to mean getting other parents involved. But that situation alone would not just be the psychologist and the social worker, because it includes other students, and there's probably going to be disciplinary action that's taken, and that's outside of our realm. We would refer that on to the principal.
Why did you choose this field?
So I knew in high school, I chose this field. I knew in high school that I had, when I looked at my own strengths and weaknesses, I knew, number one, that I loved working with kids. I did a lot of babysitting. I was like the babysitter in my neighborhood, and I knew I enjoyed it and I liked it. And number two, I knew strengths and weakness wise, one of my strengths is that I had a strong emotional IQ, that I could, my friends came to me for advice, they came to me for help, that I always had strong empathy for other people, and I knew that I wanted to help children who had been that needed help, either socially, emotionally, behaviorally, that I was drawn to that. I had thought about school social work, I had thought about school psychology, I had thought about clinical psychology, because there's a lot that you can do with that. I chose the schools because I felt like this particular degree would give me a little bit of everything I wanted, as opposed to working outside of the school.
Sort of the same for me. I knew I wanted to work with kids, and I have a background in criminal justice and sociology, so I'm not a fan of like locking kids up and they make one wrong mistake. So work in the school.
You wanted to do more of the preventative
before. And not the actual, oh, you're a bad kid. I don't think there's no bad kid. So being in school, we can work on different strategies like coping skills and your strengths and weaknesses, and how can we change your path, because you're a kid. You don't really know what you're doing. Your brain's not fully developed yet. So that's why I did it. Now I'm doing the psych route because psych is a little bit hard. I'm like, I don't even know if I have the brain power to do psych. Like those exams, like, no, that's not for me. But yeah, I don't want to do clinical. Maybe one day down the line, but like right now, I think school is where I want to be.
Yeah. I think I liked it too. So school psychology, only part of my job is counseling. The other part is I work with kids with disabilities. So I help with the evaluation portion of that. Like down at the elementary level, the school psychologist is the one that is There's a team when you're looking at a learning disability or autism or ADHD, or other behavioral emotional issues. And I thought it would be so interesting to put all the different pieces of the puzzle together and figure out how you can help that child. So I was really interested in the assessment portion of it too, which is what school psychology includes.
And I don't really do much assessments, like on what she does. We do assessments, but
Not with the learning portion
right,
of
not
it.
the learning portions of it. And also, I enjoy connecting people with different resources. Like if I can't help you, it's someone out there can, help you do something. And also, I wanted to be the person I needed as a kid. So that's why I got into the field of social work.
That's cool.
Have you ever felt like you let a student down?
I have been in the school. This is my first time actually being in the school setting. So I wouldn't say a student, but a client, probably let a client down.
That's what I feel like too. So after undergrad, before I got into graduate school, I worked at an alcohol and drug rehab center, and I had this event situation haunts me today. I had a client that came in. She had been using heroin, and she was 6 months pregnant. So at the time, my level of what I was working at was hooking her up with resources. And so my job was to find a doctor for her. Well, I was having a very hard time finding a doctor in the area that we worked in. I was in Charleston, Illinois at the time, because they wouldn't take the medical card, and they quite honestly didn't want to take the responsibility of a pregnant person at 6 months who had been using heroin. So I had to take her, she and I went to Danville, and I took her to her doctor she had there. And whenever I tried to get the doctor to sign off, there was a language barrier too with the doctor. And I don't know, I honestly to this day don't know if that would have made a difference or not, but I was trying to say, I need you to sign this form saying that if the client goes into labor, we can take the client to the hospital, because we were in Charleston, this was in Danville, it was some ways away. If she went into labor, we may not make it to Danville, before she had the baby. Well, he would not sign off on that paperwork saying it was okay to take her to the hospital. And so when I got back and I met with my director, she's like, we can't keep her then. If we don't have that piece of paper, we can't keep her. And I was the one that had to tell the client, and she cried in my office and said, I will use again. I'm telling you right now. And she looked at me in the eye and said, she was African American, and she said, I've never trusted white people, and you just gave me another reason not to trust you. And it was like the worst feeling in the world. I did get her into a rehab center in Champaign, and so they came and picked her up. But she was telling me, I'm going to leave. If you send me there, I am walking out against medical advice. I will use again, and like having that on my shoulders. I actually, I left the job pretty soon after that, because I was so upset and frustrated, because when I went back to my director and was explaining that to her, she said, there's nothing we can do, the client has to leave, they can't stay here. And I felt like that was just really wrong.
And that's one of the tricky part of working with individuals with addiction, is because we can't want it more than they do. And we can see the end, like we're doing all these good steps, you're doing it. But all it takes is that one instant for them to just, I'm not doing this anymore. And that's the hardest part. Like people really don't stay in addiction. You can love addiction or you hate it, because you never know with addiction.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
That was just so hard for me, because it was an unborn baby that had no choice, and I couldn't protect the client, I couldn't protect that baby. I can't think of a situation like when you asked of a student that I've let a student down. As a school psychologist and school social worker, sometimes we have to tell people things they don't want to hear. That could be a parent or a teacher or an administrator. Many times we advocate on the behalf of kids, and it's not necessarily things that teachers want to hear, or administrators want to hear, or parents want to hear. And so that's hard, but we do it on behalf. I mean, our number one job is to advocate for our clients who are students.
Okay. This is our last question, but why did you choose this job, and is it always an easy job?
It's not always easy, but I think we love what we do, so we always come back.
It is not easy. Especially I feel like being in the school setting, when you went into this field, you went into it because you like people, you want to help people, and you want to make things better. And so when there are times, like I said, when you're telling administrators something about the law with special ed or something we need to do for a student and it's not what they want to hear and they're upset with you, or you feel like you're getting put in a hard situation, that is not easy. Well, like think of some of the examples you guys have brought up of, like, you know, with parents and stuff, that knowing you are going to have to deliver bad news or news that may not be accepted well, or even helping support a student and knowing their family is going through such a hard time, it's hard not to take that home. Or if you have a student that you know, at the end of the day, like, you can help them with coping strategies, but you may know their situation at home is not ideal, and you're sending them home and there is only so much you can do. That's hard.
After you had that experience with, like, the pregnant woman and the heroin, did you ever, like, think you were still, like, learning to, like, get all your stuff, right? Like, all your degrees and all that. So did you ever, like, think about changing and not wanting to do this job anymore?
Well, so that was an adult, and I took that job as to get experience, but like Alina said, that's addiction. Addiction is it can be really hard because the client has to want it more than you. So I will say, if anything, it made me more want to get into the schools. That was more probably my decision to get into the schools.
So it, like, kind of helped you make that decision.
Right, exactly.
Okay, well, that's it. Thank you guys so much.
Do you have any other questions that you didn't have written down?
I don't think so.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.